The last thing Adrian remembered from his first life was the sound of a heart monitor losing rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Fluorescent hospital lights blurred above him, too bright, too cold. The smell of disinfectant clung to the air, sharp and unforgiving. He tried to move his fingers, but they felt like they belonged to someone else. Voices echoed in the hallway, distant, indifferent, as if the world had already continued without him. Regrets didn't come gently. They came like a storm. His mother's name flashing on his phone while he pressed decline because he was too busy. Marcus's smiling face as he signed a contract he never fully read. Lena standing in the rain years ago, waiting for words he never said. The graduation he skipped. The apology he postponed. The promises he thought he had more time to keep. I'll fix it tomorrow, he had always told himself. Tomorrow had never come. A nurse adjusted something beside him, unaware that his entire life was unraveling in silence. Adrian wanted to shout, to rewind, to beg for one more chance, not for money, not for success, but for 5 simple minutes with the people he had taken for granted. His lips barely moved. Mom. I'm sorry. Darkness answered. He woke up gasping. The ceiling fan spun above him with its familiar crooked wobble, humming like an old song he hadn't heard in years. His lungs filled with warm air instead of sterile cold. The pillow smelled faintly of detergent and sunlight. Outside, a car horn blared, followed by the chatter of early morning traffic. Life, ordinary, noisy, imperfect life, poured back into his senses all at once. Adrian sat up so fast his head spun. This isn't real, he whispered. He touched his face. No oxygen tubes. No hospital band. His hands were younger, smoother. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen lighting up with the date. June 3rd. His heart slammed against his ribs. That date was burned into his memory, the day before everything fell apart. He stumbled out of bed and nearly tripped over a pair of sneakers he remembered throwing there 10 years ago. Even the crack in the wall near the window was the same jagged line he used to ignore. Am I dreaming? He muttered, splashing water on his face in the bathroom. The cold sting was real. The reflection staring back at him was real. 22 years old again. He opened his drawer with shaking hands and found a small plastic star keychain tucked in the corner, faded blue, scratched from years of neglect. His mother had given it to him when he was a child. He hadn't seen it in forever. In his previous life, he had lost it somewhere during a move and never cared enough to look. Now it felt like a message. A tiny, ridiculous symbol whispering, "You're back." His phone buzzed. Mom calling. The screen glowed with the same name he had once ignored, the same moment he had replayed in regret 1,000 times. His thumb hovered over the red decline button out of pure habit. The muscle memory was terrifying. For a split second, he almost pressed it. Instead, he inhaled and tapped answer. Hello. His voice cracked. Adrian. You're up early, his mother said, surprised. I just wanted to remind you not to skip breakfast again. Anne. I hope you have a good day, okay? He closed his eyes, swallowing the lump in his throat. In his first life, he barely remembered this call. Now it felt like the universe placing a fragile gift in his hands. I will, he said softly. I promise. When the call ended, Adrian stood in the quiet of his room, the ceiling fan still humming above him, the plastic star cool in his palm. Nothing looked extraordinary. The same bed. The same walls. The same morning light creeping through the curtains. But everything felt different. He wasn't just alive again. He was aware. The world hadn't changed, he had. And as the sun rose outside his window, Adrian understood that fate hadn't rewound to save him from pain. It had rewound to see if he would finally choose differently. Adrian discovered quickly that remembering the future didn't make mornings easier, it just made them heavier. The alarm rang at 6 a.m. The same cheap ringtone he used to snooze 5 times before dragging himself out of bed. In his previous life, he had always chosen 5 more minutes, then rushed through the day half awake and irritated. This time he opened his eyes immediately, and still lay there, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above him. The discipline was new, but the exhaustion felt ancient, like his mind had lived 2 lifetimes while his body had only lived 1. He forced himself up, walked to the kitchen, and cooked eggs he accidentally burned because he kept drifting into memories instead of watching the stove. Small habits became quiet battles. He deleted the social media apps that once swallowed hours of his evenings. He set reminders for tasks he used to ignore. He even made his bed, something the old Adrian would have laughed at. None of it felt heroic. It felt like cleaning up a mess no one else could see. But knowledge didn't guarantee success. He practiced for a job interview in front of the mirror, repeating answers he had memorized from his first life. When the actual interview came, his throat tightened, and the words tangled anyway. He left the building knowing he had done better than before, and still not well enough. The rejection email arrived 2 days later, polite and cold. For a moment, frustration boiled inside him. I knew this would happen. I prepared. Why didn't it change? He realized then that rebirth wasn't a cheat code, it was just another opportunity to try differently. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old photos on his phone, questioning whether any of this was real. The dates matched his memories. Events he remembered hadn't happened yet. He even searched the news for a minor accident he clearly recalled, and found nothing. A chill crept down his spine. He splashed water on his face in the bathroom, gripping the sink as he stared at his reflection. What if I'm just losing it, he whispered. A knock on the door broke the spiral. His mother peeked in, holding 2 cups of tea. You've been quiet lately, she said with a soft smile. You're acting like a 40-year-old man trapped in a young body. He laughed weakly and joined her in the kitchen. She talked about small things, a neighbor's new dog, a sale at the grocery store. Stories he once would have tuned out. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a tiny, scratched keychain shaped like a star. You remember this? She asked. You cried for 2 days when you lost it in primary school. I found it in an old box. Adrian stared at the faded plastic star in her palm. He didn't remember crying. He didn't remember losing it. In his first life, moments like that had slipped through his fingers unnoticed. Now they felt priceless. He took the keychain, the plastic warm from her hand, and felt a lump rise in his throat. Time wasn't just giving him a second chance, it was returning pieces of himself he hadn't realized were missing. Outside the apartment, the world didn't fully understand his change. At work, a coworker nudged him and joked, "You're different these days." What happened? Secret life coach? Hidden inheritance? Another friend laughed and added, "You used to be fun. Now you think too much." Their words were playful, but they stung. Growth, Adrian realized, could look like arrogance or distance to people who only knew the old version of him. He wasn't trying to be superior, he was trying not to repeat mistakes, but the line between caution and coldness was thinner than he expected. Walking home that night, city lights reflecting off rain puddles, Adrian felt the full weight of knowing. Every step forward carried 2 timelines, the one he lived before and the one he was trying to build now. The pressure wasn't just about avoiding disaster, it was about proving to himself that he could change in ways that mattered. When he reached his apartment door, he glanced at the small star keychain hanging from his fingers. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't powerful. But it was proof that life wasn't only made of big turning points. It was stitched together from forgotten details, tiny habits, and moments most people didn't realize were disappearing. Rebirth wasn't giving him a perfect path. It was forcing him to walk his imperfect one, with his eyes finally open. The first real shift in Adrian's new life didn't happen during a big decision. It happened over a cup of cheap coffee. The cafe was small, warm, and smelled of burnt sugar and cinnamon, the same cafe he had once walked past every day without entering. Lena sat across from him, laughing at something he barely remembered saying, sunlight catching the edges of her hair. In his first life, he had watched her from a distance like a painting behind glass. Now she was real, elbows on the table, teasing him for drinking his coffee too sweet. You always look like you're thinking 10 steps ahead, she said. Adrian smiled faintly. If only you knew. There were moments he wanted to tell her everything, about the hospital room, the regrets, the impossible rewind of time. The words would rise to his throat, heavy and desperate, then fall back down. Who would believe him? And even if she did, would it change how she saw him? Their friendship grew in quiet ways. Shared bus rides. Late-night messages about nothing important. Inside jokes about the cafe's terrible music playlist. It felt natural, almost suspiciously easy, and Adrian caught himself wondering if fate was finally bending in his favor. Then Daniel returned. He didn't arrive like a villain. He arrived carrying Lena's dropped books and making her laugh within seconds. Confident. Polite. Effortless. Adrian felt the past life surge inside him like cold water. The same scene. The same smile. The same invisible competition he had once lost without even trying. One evening, Adrian watched them talk outside the office building. Lena's laughter echoed across the pavement, and jealousy wrapped around his chest like a tightening rope. The painful truth hit him: rebirth hadn't erased his flaws. He still feared being second choice. Still measured his worth in silence. Instead of disappearing like before, he chose confrontation, not with Daniel, but with himself. A week later, sitting on a park bench beneath flickering streetlights, he finally told Lena how he felt. His voice wasn't dramatic or poetic. It trembled. He stumbled over words. He admitted he was scared. She didn't confess love. She didn't reject him either. She just looked surprised, and thoughtful. "I don't want to rush," she said gently. "But I'm glad you told me." It wasn't a fairy tale answer. But it was real. And real felt better than regret. The offer came on a rainy Thursday, the kind of rain that blurred city lights and made reflections look like alternate realities. Marcus arrived with polished shoes, a sleek folder, and the same grin Adrian remembered from the life he'd lost. The proposal was nearly identical to the one that had once destroyed him, just refined enough to plant doubt. New partners. Better statistics. Cleaner contracts. "You're smarter now," Marcus said, sliding the papers across the glass table. "You won't mess this up." That sentence lingered. At home, bills lay scattered across Adrian's desk like quiet accusations. Rent was due. His mother had mentioned postponing a medical checkup again because it wasn't urgent. The rejection email from his last interview still sat unopened, its subject line glowing like a warning he didn't want to read. The deal looked like a lifeline, the kind that shimmered just enough to hide the hooks beneath it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When it finally did, it brought memories with it, flashes of his previous downfall. Empty rooms. Unanswered calls. The hollow echo of losing everything all over again. He woke with his heart racing, unsure for a second which life he was in. The next afternoon, seated across from Marcus in a glass-walled office overlooking the city, Adrian picked up the pen. His fingers were slick with sweat. The plastic felt heavier than it should have. A faint ringing filled his ears, dulling the sound of Marcus's voice until the words became distant murmurs. His heartbeat thudded louder than the rain against the windows, each pulse counting down like a clock he couldn't see. Sign it. End the struggle. Be done with uncertainty. Then his mind betrayed him, or saved him. For a split second, two futures collided behind his eyes. He saw himself months from now, sitting alone in a dim apartment, unpaid bills stacked higher than before, his mother's missed calls lighting up his screen again. He saw Lena's quiet disappointment, not angry, just tired. The same exhaustion that had once followed him to a hospital bed. And then another image, softer, quieter. A small dinner table. Steam rising from cheap takeout. Laughter over nothing important. A normal morning where he woke without dread twisting in his chest. The visions weren't magic. They were memory and imagination colliding at full force. The pen touched the paper. He wrote the first letter of his name. His hand stopped. A simple, brutal truth surfaced in his mind, clear as glass. If I sign this, it's not fate. It's me choosing it. Adrian inhaled, the air shaky but real, and tore the contract straight down the middle. The ripping sound cut through the room sharper than any argument could have. Marcus's expression cracked from confidence to anger in seconds. Accusations followed, words like coward and ungrateful thrown across the table like weapons. Adrian barely heard them. The ringing in his ears had faded, replaced by something unfamiliar but steady. Silence inside himself. When he stepped back into the rain, the city lights no longer looked like alternate realities. They looked like possibilities, uncertain, imperfect, but finally his to walk toward without pretending he didn't know where certain roads led. Months later, the news finally appeared on Adrian's phone: the investment firm Marcus once promoted had collapsed under investigation. Different company name, different faces on the headline, the same ending. Adrian stared at the screen for a long moment, expecting satisfaction to bloom in his chest. It didn't. There was only a quiet exhale, like releasing a breath he'd been holding for years. Being right didn't feel powerful. It just felt peaceful. The past version of himself had needed disaster to learn. This version had only needed awareness. Life afterward didn't transform into a shining dream. Success came in small, steady steps: a modest promotion, projects completed on time, evenings that ended without anxiety twisting in his stomach. Lena didn't rush into his arms in a grand confession, she simply stayed. Conversations stretched longer. Silences became comfortable. Choice replaced chance. His mother's health improved because he sat beside her in waiting rooms instead of sending hurried texts filled with apologies and promises of next time. One afternoon, leaving work, Adrian spotted Marcus across the street. The city noise rushed between them: engines, footsteps, distant laughter. For a second, the old tension flickered like a fading signal. Marcus looked up too. Their eyes met. No anger. No forgiveness speech. Just a brief nod. The light changed, and the crowd carried them in opposite directions. Adrian didn't look back. He realized he wasn't walking away from Marcus, he was walking away from the version of himself who once needed his approval. On the anniversary of the day he had died, Adrian returned to the rooftop where his first life had quietly ended. The wind brushed against his jacket, warm with the scent of morning sun and distant street food. He reached into his pocket and felt the small plastic star keychain press against his fingers: scratched, faded, ordinary. He smiled without thinking. The city below was alive in the most unremarkable ways: a bus stopping too late, a couple arguing over directions, a vendor burning toast that sent a thin ribbon of smoke into the air. Imperfections layered over each other like brushstrokes, forming something unexpectedly beautiful. His phone buzzed, Lena teasing him about being late again. He laughed under his breath and started toward the stairwell, nearly missing a step before catching himself on the railing. Still clumsy, he murmured, shaking his head. The sunrise spilled gold across the buildings, brighter than he remembered yet softer somehow, like the world wasn't demanding anything from him anymore. For the first time in both of his lives, tomorrow didn't feel like a threat or a race. It felt like space, open, unwritten, human. As he stepped back into the stairwell, the faint hum of a ceiling fan from a nearby apartment drifted through the air, blending with morning birds and distant traffic. The sound no longer reminded him of endings. It reminded him of waking up. He tightened his grip on the small star and let a quiet thought settle in his mind, simple and steady. I don't need another life. This one is enough.